The space station Concordia floated in the empty darkness between three star systems. It was huge, bigger than most cities on Earth. The station had been built as a meeting place where different alien races could talk without fighting. Bright lights from the docking bays cut through the black void as ships from across the galaxy came and went. General Vexithera stood in the main waiting area, watching ships dock through the large windows. He was 8 feet tall and built like a living tank. His body was covered in natural armor that looked like green metal plates. 4 powerful arms hung at his sides, each one strong enough to crush steel. His face had sharp angles and burning yellow eyes that missed nothing. The general commanded the military forces of the Koran Empire. His people had been warriors for thousands of years. They had conquered dozens of worlds through strength and skill in battle. Every Koran soldier was born ready to fight. Their thick armor protected them from almost any weapon. Their multiple arms let them use more guns and swords than other races could even hold. Today was special. The Korans were about to meet humans for the first time. The Terran Alliance had sent a military team to discuss working together. Vexithara had heard stories about these humans, but he found them hard to believe. The report said humans had only been traveling between stars for a few decades. Most races took centuries to develop that kind of technology. What confused the general most was how humans had survived long enough to build spaceships. According to the intelligence files, they had no natural armor, no claws or fangs for fighting. No extra arms or enhanced strength. They seemed to be one of the weakest species anyone had ever discovered, yet somehow they had not only survived on their home planet, but had spread to other worlds. A soft chime echoed through the docking bay. The human ship had arrived. Vexithara straightened his massive frame and checked his ceremonial weapons. First, meetings were important. They set the tone for everything that came after. He wanted these humans to understand exactly what kind of military power the Korans possessed. The airlock door slid open with a quiet hiss. Vexithara expected to see warriors who matched their reputation for surviving in space. Perhaps they would be cyborgs with mechanical parts to make up for their weak bodies. Maybe they wore powered armor that gave them artificial strength. At the very least, they should look dangerous enough to have built an interstellar alliance. Instead, a small figure in plain gray clothes stepped through the doorway. The human was shorter than Vexithara had imagined, maybe 5.5 feet tall. His uniform was simple cloth with no visible armor or weapons. He had brown hair that was cut very short and calm blue eyes that took in everything around him, without showing fear or excitement. The human walked forward with steady steps and stopped at the proper distance for a formal greeting. He raised his right hand to his forehead in what must have been a military salute. When he spoke, his voice was clear and polite. General Vexithera, I am Lieutenant Colonel Jake Morrison, representing the Terran Alliance military. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Vexithara stared down at the tiny creature in front of him. This was their military representative, this soft, weak-looking thing with skin like paper and arms thinner than the general's fingers. Morrison could not weigh more than 150 pounds. A strong wind might knock him over. The Koran general had eaten meals bigger than this human. The general's mandibles clicked together in the sound his people made when they found something funny. Several of his aide officers gathered around to get a better look at the human. They whispered to each other in their own language, making jokes about what they were seeing. You are the warrior they sent to meet with me? Vexithara asked. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. Where is your armor? Your weapons? How do you expect to fight anything looking like that? Morrison did not react to the insults. He kept the same calm expression and maintained his military posture. I am here to discuss cooperation between our forces, General. I believe we have much to learn from each other. This made Vexithara laugh even louder. Learn from each other? What could my soldiers possibly learn from someone who looks like he would break if I shook his hand too hard? Other aliens in the docking area had stopped their own business to watch what was happening. Representatives from a dozen different species formed a loose circle around the 2 military officers. Some looked uncomfortable with how the general was treating the human. Others seemed curious to see how this first meeting would go. Morrison waited until the laughter died down before speaking again. Human military doctrine focuses on different strengths than raw physical power, General. We have found ways to be effective that might interest your strategists. Effective? Vexithera reached out with one of his forearms and gestured at Morrison's small frame. You have no claws, no natural armor, no enhanced strength. Your species looks like it was designed to be prey for real predators. How can anything so weak be effective in battle? The human did not back away even though the general's massive hand was inches from his face. Most aliens would have shown some sign of fear when a Corin got that close. Morrison just stood there like he was discussing the weather. Appearances can be misleading, General. Perhaps we could demonstrate some human capabilities during our discussions. Vexithara pulled his hand back and studied the small figure more carefully. There had to be something he was missing. Maybe humans used some kind of advanced technology to make up for their weak bodies. Hidden weapons or force fields that were not visible to the naked eye. Show me your equipment, the general demanded. What weapons do you carry? What armor protects you? Morrison held up his empty hands. I am not armed, General. This is a diplomatic meeting. My only equipment is standard military gear. He gestured to a small bag at his side that clearly held nothing more dangerous than personal supplies. The general shook his head in disbelief. Then how do your people fight? How do you protect your worlds? How did you survive long enough to build spaceships? We adapt, General. Humans are very good at adapting to difficult situations. Before Vexithara could ask what that meant, an announcement echoed through the docking bay. The formal reception was about to begin in the main diplomatic hall. Representatives from all the species would gather to welcome the human delegation and discuss future cooperation. As they walked toward the reception area, Vexithara continued to study Morrison. The human moved with quiet confidence, never hurrying but never falling behind the general's much longer stride. He nodded politely to other aliens they passed but did not seem impressed or intimidated by any of them. The diplomatic hall was enormous, with a domed ceiling that showed the swirling colors of nearby space clouds. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy mingled under the artificial lights. Some were tall and thin like living crystals. Others were short and covered in fur. A few floated in special suits filled with liquid. All of them had evolved different ways to survive and thrive among the stars. Morrison looked around the hall with the same calm interest he had shown everything else. He did not stare at the strange alien forms or comment on how different they were from humans. He simply took note of who was there and waited for the formal presentations to begin. Vexithara watched the humans' reaction carefully. Most species showed some sign of being overwhelmed when they first saw the full diversity of galactic civilization. Fear, excitement, confusion, wonder, something. Morrison just stood there like he saw rooms full of aliens every day. Maybe there was more to these humans than met the eye after all. The reception hall buzzed with quiet conversations as beings from dozens of worlds gathered around floating tables. Servers moved between the groups carrying drinks and food suited for different alien biologies. The air smelled like a mixture of strange spices and recycled atmosphere. General Vexithara stood near the center of the room with several other military commanders. His voice carried easily over the background noise as he told stories about Quran victories. Every few minutes he would point toward Jake Morrison and make another comment about human weakness. Look at their representative, the general said to a group of lizard-like aliens from the Sectar Republic. No armor, no weapons, no enhanced strength. I could break him in half with one hand. How does such a species even leave their home planet? Morrison stood with the other human diplomats near one of the large windows. Ambassador Lisa Martinez kept glancing at him with worried eyes. She was a small woman with gray hair who had spent years learning how to deal with alien cultures. The current situation was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. Jake, maybe you should stay quiet, she whispered. Let the general have his fun. We need their cooperation for the mining rights in the Kepler sector. Morrison nodded but kept watching Vexithara. The general was putting on quite a show for his audience. He flexed his forearms and demonstrated combat moves that would crush most opponents. The other aliens seemed impressed by the display of raw power. In Quran military tradition, Vexithera announced loudly. Strength determines worth. A warrior who cannot fight is no warrior at all. A species that cannot defend itself does not deserve to survive among the stars. Several aliens in the crowd made sounds of agreement. Physical prowess was respected throughout most of the galaxy. Races that had reached space through violence and conquest understood the importance of military might. Peaceful species usually stayed on their homeworlds or lived under the protection of stronger neighbors. A tall, blue-skinned diplomat from the Altarian Federation approached Morrison. Her people were known for their advanced technology and diplomatic skills. Colonel Morrison, perhaps you could explain how humans achieved spaceflight without the usual military development. Most species must conquer several worlds before they gain the resources for interstellar expansion. Morrison considered his answer carefully. Humans developed space technology through cooperation and scientific research. We learned to work together, to solve complex problems. This response made Vexithera laugh so hard that his whole body shook. Cooperation? Science? That might build spaceships, but it will not protect you when real warriors come calling. What happens when someone decides to take your worlds by force? We would defend ourselves, General. With what? Vexithera gestured broadly at Morrison's small frame. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced abilities. One of my soldiers could defeat a dozen of yours without breaking a sweat. Morrison remained silent, but several other humans in the group shifted uncomfortably. They had not expected this level of open hostility at what was supposed to be a friendly, diplomatic meeting. The general sensed their discomfort and decided to push harder. He walked over to Morrison until he was standing directly in front of him. At full height, Vexithera towered over the human like a living mountain. His 4 arms could have easily surrounded Morrison completely. In fact, the general said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, I think a demonstration is in order. You claim humans can defend themselves. Prove it. The room grew quiet. Conversations stopped as aliens turned to watch what was happening. Ambassador Martinez stepped forward with her hands raised in a peaceful gesture. General, there is no need for any kind of demonstration. We are here to discuss trade agreements and mutual cooperation. Violence has no place in diplomatic negotiations. Vexithera ignored her and kept his burning yellow eyes fixed on Morrison. I am not talking about violence, Ambassador. I am talking about a simple test of military capability, a challenge between warriors to demonstrate the relative strength of our forces. The general stepped back and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the hall to hear. According to Koran tradition, military disputes can be settled through ritual combat. Not a fight to the death, but a test of endurance, skill, and determination. The first warrior to surrender or fail admits defeat for his entire military. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ritual combat was an ancient practice among many warrior species. It allowed conflicts to be resolved without full-scale war. Usually, both sides agreed to accept the results and move forward based on who proved superior. The terms are simple, Vexithera continued. Both warriors enter a controlled environment that simulates battlefield conditions. They must complete a series of objectives while dealing with harsh terrain, limited supplies, and physical challenges. Whoever finishes first or forces their opponent to quit wins honor for their people. Ambassador Martinez looked horrified. General, I must protest. Colonel Morrison is here as a diplomat, not a gladiator. The Terran Alliance did not agree to any kind of combat trial. Then perhaps humans are exactly as weak as they appear, Vexithera said with a dismissive wave of one arm. If your military representative cannot even accept a simple challenge, what does that say about your species' courage? Morrison had been listening to the entire exchange without saying a word. Now he stepped forward and looked up at the towering alien general. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. I accept your challenge, General Vexithera. The room erupted in surprise sounds from dozens of different species. Ambassador Martinez grabbed Morrison's arm and tried to pull him aside. Jake, what are you doing? You cannot be serious about this. Look at him. He is 3 times your size and has natural armor. This is suicide. Morrison gently removed her hand from his arm. Ma'am, with respect, this is now a military matter. The general has questioned the capability of human forces. As the senior military officer present, it is my duty to respond. Vexathara's mandibles clicked with pleasure. Excellent. I was beginning to think all humans were cowards. At least one of you has some fighting spirit, even if you lack the physical tools to back it up. What exactly are the rules of this challenge? Morrison asked. The general gestured to one of his aides, who stepped forward with a small electronic device. The station has a full combat simulation facility. We can program any environment we choose. Desert, jungle, Arctic, underwater, zero gravity, high radiation. Both warriors get basic survival gear and must navigate 30 kilometers of hostile terrain while completing tactical objectives. And the victory conditions? First to finish all objectives wins. If one warrior surrenders, becomes unable to continue, or fails to complete the course within 72 hours, his opponent is declared the victor. Morrison nodded. Those terms are acceptable. Vexathara could hardly believe how easy this was going to be. The human had just agreed to compete in exactly the kind of challenge that played to every Coran advantage: endurance, strength, survival skills in harsh environments. These were the things his people had been bred for over thousands of years of evolution. The challenge will take place tomorrow at the start of the station's day cycle, the general announced. All diplomatic representatives are welcome to observe through the monitoring systems. As the crowd began to disperse and return to their conversations, Vexathara pulled Morrison aside. He wanted to give the human one last chance to back down and save himself from embarrassment. Are you certain about this, Colonel? There is no shame in admitting you are outmatched. I have 4 arms to your 2. Natural armor that can stop most weapons. Enhanced strength and endurance. I have trained for combat since I was old enough to walk. What do you have that could possibly compete? With that, Morrison looked up at the massive alien with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout the entire evening. I have something you have never faced before, General. And what is that? A United States Marine. The combat simulation arena was buried deep inside Concordia Station. It was a massive room that could change into any environment the computers could imagine. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered with millions of tiny projectors that could create perfect illusions of other worlds. General Vexathara stood at one entrance to the arena, checking his equipment one final time. He wore light combat gear that would not interfere with his natural advantages. A basic water recycler, emergency, food tablets, and a simple navigation device. The rules allowed only survival equipment, no weapons or advanced technology. The general felt confident about the challenge ahead. The computer had generated a desert environment based on one of the harshest planets in Quran space. Extreme heat during the day, freezing cold at night, and very little water. Rocky terrain with steep cliffs and loose sand that made walking difficult. It was exactly the kind of place where his people had trained for generations. Jake Morrison stood at the opposite entrance, making his own preparations. His equipment was identical to the general's, but he also carried a small notebook and pencil. Vexathara had laughed when he saw the human writing supplies, but the rules allowed any non-electronic personal items. Ambassador Martinez and several other human diplomats watched through the observation deck above the arena. She still looked worried about the entire situation, but Morrison had made it clear that backing down was not an option. The challenge had been issued and accepted according to proper military protocol. Dozens of alien representatives filled the other viewing areas. Word of the contest had spread throughout the station. Many species wanted to see how the newcomer humans would perform against established galactic military power. Most of the betting heavily favored the Coran general. A computerized voice echoed through the arena. Combat simulation beginning in 60 seconds. Environment: desert survival scenario. Distance: 30 kilometers. Objectives: reach 5 checkpoint beacons in sequence. Collect data packages at each location. Survive all environmental hazards. Time limit: 72 hours. Participants may begin on the signal. Vexathara stretched his forearms and cracked his knuckles. Each hand was strong enough to crush stone. His natural armor could protect him from sandstorms and temperature extremes. His enhanced metabolism meant he needed less water and food than most other species. This challenge would be over in a few hours. Morrison finished his equipment check and stood ready at his starting position. He had removed his uniform jacket and rolled up his sleeves in preparation for the heat. His skin was pale compared to the general's armored hide, and he looked even smaller in the vast arena. Begin simulation. The arena transformed instantly. Sand dunes stretched to the horizon under a blazing artificial sun. The temperature jumped to over 100 degrees. Wind began blowing from multiple directions, carrying stinging sand particles. The smell of hot rock and dry air filled the space. Vexthera charged forward immediately. His plan was simple: use his superior speed and strength to reach each checkpoint as quickly as possible. He moved across the sand like a living tank, his forearms pumping as he covered ground at an impressive pace. The heat did not bother him. The rough terrain barely slowed him down. Morrison took a different approach. He spent the first few minutes studying the landscape and making notes in his small book. He checked the position of the artificial sun and marked compass headings. He tested the wind direction and examined the sand to understand how stable the dunes might be. From the observation deck, Ambassador Martinez watched with growing concern. The human was already falling behind. Vexthera had disappeared over the first ridge while Morrison was still taking notes like he was on a nature walk. "What is he doing?" asked Dr. Kevin Hayes, the human science officer. "The general is going to reach the first checkpoint before Jake even starts moving." "I do not know," Martinez replied. "But Colonel Morrison has more combat experience than anyone else in our delegation. We have to trust that he knows what he is doing." Down in the arena, Morrison finally began walking. His pace was steady but not rushed. He followed a route that avoided the steepest dunes and took advantage of any shade he could find. Every few minutes he would stop to take a small sip of water and make another note in his book. Vexthera reached the first checkpoint beacon after 45 minutes of hard travel. The beacon was positioned on top of a rocky hill that required climbing the last 100 meters. The general's forearms made the climb easy. He retrieved the data package and immediately set off toward the second checkpoint. The Quran general was feeling excellent. His natural advantages were working exactly as expected. The heat energized him rather than draining his strength. His armor protected him from the worst effects of blowing sand. His enhanced endurance meant he could maintain this pace for hours, without rest. Morrison arrived at the first checkpoint 20 minutes later. He had taken a longer route that followed the base of the hills instead of going straight across the dunes. The climb to reach the beacon took him longer with only 2 arms, but he managed it without apparent difficulty. More importantly, Morrison did not seem tired. His breathing was steady and controlled. He drank a measured amount of water and made more notes before continuing toward the second checkpoint. The second beacon was located in a narrow canyon that provided relief from the sun but created new challenges. The walls were steep and the floor was covered with loose rocks that shifted underfoot. Flash flooding had carved the canyon into a maze of side passages and dead ends. Vexthera entered the canyon at full speed, confident that his strength would carry him through any obstacles. He leaped from rock to rock and used his forearms to steady himself when the ground gave way. The canyon was cooler than the open desert, but the general's enhanced metabolism kept him warm. Halfway through the canyon, Vexthera made his first mistake. He chose a passage that looked like the most direct route to the beacon, but it led to a dead end blocked by fallen boulders. He had to backtrack and try a different path, losing precious time. Morrison entered the canyon 30 minutes behind the general, but he moved with careful deliberation. At each branching passage, he stopped to examine the ground for signs of water flow. Flash floods always followed the path of least resistance to reach the beacon location. By reading the landscape, he could determine which passages led forward and which led nowhere. When Morrison reached the second checkpoint, he found something interesting. Vexthera had left clear tracks in the soft sand around the beacon. The depth and spacing of the footprints told a story. The general was starting to breathe harder. His steps were becoming less steady. The relentless pace was beginning to take its toll. Morrison collected the second data package and continued toward the third checkpoint. The route led back into open desert, but now the artificial sun was beginning to set. The temperature was dropping quickly as the simulation moved into its night cycle. By the time full darkness fell, Both warriors were dealing with new challenges. The desert became bitterly cold, dropping below freezing within an hour of sunset. Wind picked up and began howling across the dunes. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Vexithera had reached the third checkpoint first, but he was no longer moving with the same confidence. The extreme temperature change was harder on his system than he had expected. His natural armor was excellent, for protection, but it also conducted heat and cold more efficiently than ordinary skin. Morrison had planned for the temperature drop. During his rest stops, he had been loosening and tightening his clothing to understand how the fabric responded to different conditions. When the cold hit, he was ready. He adjusted his gear to trap warm air while still allowing freedom of movement. More importantly, Morrison had been pacing himself, while Vexithera had been using his enhanced strength to power through obstacles. The human had been finding efficient solutions that conserved energy. He was not just surviving the challenge, he was managing it. As the first night of the simulation continued, something unexpected began to happen. Morrison started gaining ground on the general. Dawn broke over the simulated desert with harsh light that turned the sand dunes into waves of gold and shadow. The artificial sun climbed quickly into the sky, bringing with it the promise of another day of punishing heat. General Vexithera stood on a rocky outcrop, checking his navigation device and trying to understand what had gone wrong during the night. He had reached the fourth checkpoint first, but only barely. The human had arrived less than 10 minutes behind him, moving through the darkness with steady determination. Morrison had not used a light or stumbled over obstacles. He had simply kept walking at the same measured pace he had maintained since the challenge began. Vexithera looked down at his own equipment. His water supply was lower than he had planned. The extreme temperature changes had forced his body to work harder than expected. His natural armor was excellent protection, but it also made him heavier. Every step in the loose sand required more effort than it would for a lighter opponent. The general shook his head and started toward the final checkpoint. He still had advantages: his enhanced strength, his 4 arms, his superior size and reach. This human might be tougher than expected, but toughness only went so far. When it came to the final push, Karan's superiority would show itself. Morrison stood at the base of the outcrop, making his morning notes. He had been tracking the general's condition throughout the night by examining footprints and rest stops. The story they told was encouraging. Vexithera was pushing himself harder than his body could sustain. His steps were becoming less steady. His rest stops were getting longer. The human checked his own condition carefully. His water supply was exactly where it should be according to his calculations. His energy levels were stable. His equipment was functioning properly. Most importantly, his mind was clear and focused. He was not just surviving the challenge anymore. He was starting to control it. The final checkpoint was located at the top of a mountain that rose from the desert floor like a knife blade. The climb would be steep and dangerous, especially in the heat of the day. Loose rocks and narrow ledges would test both warriors to their limits. Morrison began the approach to the mountain, while Vexithera was still visible as a distant figure moving across the sand dunes. The human had finally taken the lead, not through speed, but through consistency. While the general had been forced to rest and recover from his night march, Morrison had kept moving at his sustainable pace. From the observation deck, Ambassador Martinez watched the display screens with amazement. How is this possible? Jake should have collapsed hours ago. Look at the size difference between them. Dr. Hayes was studying the environmental readouts from sensors placed throughout the arena. The general is showing signs of heat exhaustion. His core temperature has been fluctuating wildly. Jake's vital signs have been stable since the challenge began. But how? The general has natural armor and enhanced physiology. Everything about him should be superior for this type of environment. Maybe that is the problem, Hayes said quietly. The general was designed for short-term combat. Overwhelming force applied quickly to achieve victory. This challenge requires something different. Down in the arena, Vexithera was discovering the truth of that observation. The mountain climb was proving more difficult than anything he had faced in years. His 4 arms gave him more options for finding handholds, but they also made him heavier and less agile on narrow ledges. Worse, his enhanced metabolism was working against him. The same system that gave him incredible strength in battle was now demanding more water and energy than his supplies could provide. He was burning through his reserves at an unsustainable rate. Morrison began his climb an hour behind the general, but his approach was completely different. Where Vexithara had tried to power his way up the steepest routes, Morrison found paths that worked with his limitations instead of against them. He used technique instead of strength, balance instead of brute force. The human had studied rock climbing manuals during his military training, not because he expected to scale mountains in combat, but because Marines were taught to prepare for any situation. The principles of efficient movement and energy conservation applied whether you were climbing cliffs or crossing enemy territory. Halfway up the mountain, Morrison began to catch glimpses of the general above him. Vexithara was still ahead, but he was moving slowly and taking frequent rest stops. His massive frame was clearly visible against the rock face, and even from a distance, Morrison could see that something was wrong. When Morrison reached a ledge where the general had rested, he found disturbing evidence. Vexithara had spilled water from his supply pack. The dark stains on the rock showed that his normally precise movements were becoming clumsy. More telling were the deep gouges his claws had left in the stone. The general was gripping handholds, much harder than necessary, a sign of growing desperation. Morrison made careful notes of what he observed and continued climbing. His own condition remained stable. The techniques he was using distributed his weight efficiently and conserved energy. He was not fighting the mountain, he was working with it. 2 hours later, Morrison saw Vexithara directly above him for the first time. The general was wedged into a crack in the rock face, breathing heavily and clearly struggling. His yellow eyes had lost their confident fire. Sweat was running down his armored plates despite the cooling effect of altitude. The human continued his steady ascent. When he reached the spot where Vexithara was resting, the general looked down at him with something approaching disbelief. "How?" Vexithara gasped. "How are you still climbing? You should have collapsed hours ago. You have no enhancements, no natural advantages. What are you?" Morrison paused on a secure ledge below the general and looked up at him. For the first time since the challenge began, he allowed himself a small smile. "I am exactly what I told you, General. I am a United States Marine, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Regiment. I have been through survival training in deserts, mountains, jungles, and Arctic conditions. I have carried heavier packs over longer distances in worse weather. This is not the worst Tuesday I have ever had." Vexithara stared at the human in growing amazement. "But you are so small, so weak. How can your species survive with such limited physical capabilities?" "We do not rely on physical capabilities alone, General. We use our minds. We adapt. We endure. We find ways to win that do not depend on being the biggest or strongest or fastest." Morrison checked his equipment and prepared to continue climbing. "Your people are impressive warriors, General. In a straight fight, one of your soldiers could probably defeat 10 of mine. But this is not a straight fight. This is a test of endurance, planning, and determination. These are things humans have been perfecting for thousands of years." The general watched Morrison resume his climb with smooth, efficient movements. The human was not showing off or trying to demonstrate superiority. He was simply doing his job with the methodical professionalism of someone who had faced similar challenges many times before. For the first time since the contest began, Vexithara felt something he had never experienced in combat. Doubt. Not about his own abilities, but about his understanding of what combat actually meant. He had spent his life preparing for battles that were won through strength and speed. He had never considered that there might be other ways to fight. Morrison disappeared over a ledge above, continuing toward the final checkpoint with the same steady pace that had carried him through the entire challenge. Vexithara forced himself to resume climbing, but he could no longer ignore the truth that was becoming clear with every step. The human was going to win. The final checkpoint beacon sat on the highest peak of the mountain, a small metal device that gleamed in the afternoon sun. The last 50 meters of the climb were the most dangerous. The rock face was nearly vertical, with few handholds and loose stones that could break away without warning. A fall from this height would end the challenge permanently. General Vexithera reached the base of the final climb first, but only because Morrison had stopped to help him navigate a particularly difficult section of the route. The human had found the general wedged between two boulders, his massive frame trapped by the very size that had once been his greatest advantage. Morrison could have continued past the struggling alien without a word. The rules of the challenge did not require him to provide assistance. Victory was within his grasp, and he would have been justified in claiming it. Instead, he had spent 20 minutes showing Vexithera how to shift his weight and use leverage to free himself from the trap. Now both warriors stood at the bottom of the final ascent, breathing hard in the thin mountain air. The general's condition had deteriorated dramatically over the past few hours. His natural armor, designed to protect him in battle, had become a burden that drained his strength with every movement. His forearms, once symbols of superior capability, now felt like dead weight attached to his exhausted body. Morrison checked his equipment one final time. His water supply was almost gone, but he had calculated exactly how much he would need to reach the top and return safely. His energy levels were low but sustainable. Most importantly, his mind remained clear and focused. The challenge was almost over, and he intended to finish it properly. "Why did you help me?" Vexithera asked suddenly. His voice was hoarse from dehydration and exhaustion. "You could have left me trapped and won the challenge easily. Why give up your advantage?" Morrison looked at the towering alien with the same calm expression he had maintained throughout their encounter. "Because leaving someone behind is not what Marines do, General. We finish the mission, but we bring everyone home." The general stared at the human in confusion. "But I am your enemy in this contest. I have mocked your species and questioned your capabilities. Why show mercy to someone who has treated you with disrespect? You are not my enemy, General. You are a fellow warrior testing himself against a difficult challenge. Respect is earned through actions, not words. Your actions today have earned my respect." Vexithera felt something shift inside his chest, an emotion he had no name for. In Koran culture, strength was everything. The weak were dominated or discarded. Mercy was seen as a character flaw that made warriors soft and ineffective. Yet this human had shown him kindness when he was most vulnerable, and somehow that kindness felt more powerful than any display of force. Morrison began his final climb with the same methodical approach he had used throughout the challenge. Each handhold was tested carefully before he committed his weight to it. Each step was planned to conserve energy and maintain balance. He moved like water flowing upward, finding the path of least resistance while never stopping his forward progress. Getty. General watched in fascination as Morrison solved problems that would have required brute force to overcome. When a handhold crumbled, the human shifted his weight smoothly to compensate. When loose rocks blocked his path, he found alternative routes that worked around the obstacles. Everything Morrison did was efficient, purposeful, and effective. Vexithera began his own climb, but his movements were clumsy and desperate. His enhanced strength, depleted by hours of exertion, was no longer sufficient to power his massive frame up the steep rock face. His forearms, designed for grappling with enemies, could not find secure grips on the narrow ledges. For the first time in his life, his natural advantages had become weaknesses. Morrison reached the final checkpoint 20 minutes before the general. He activated the beacon, collected the last data package, and completed the challenge according to the established rules. The victory was clear and undeniable. A human had defeated a Koran warrior in a test of endurance and skill, but Morrison did not celebrate or claim his triumph. Instead, he secured a climbing rope to the beacon mount and lowered it down to where Vexithera was struggling on a ledge 30 feet below. "General, grab the rope. I will help you reach the top." Vexithera looked up at the human in amazement. "Why? You have already won. There is no need to assist me further." "Because the challenge is not over until both of us reach the top safely, General. That is how humans measure success. Not by who finishes first, but by whether everyone makes it home." The general grasped the rope with all four hands and allowed Morrison to help pull him up the final section of the climb. When he finally stood on the summit beside the human, Vexithera felt completely humbled, not by defeat in combat, but by the realization that he had fundamentally misunderstood what strength actually meant. The two warriors stood together on the mountain peak, looking out over the simulated desert that stretched to the horizon. The artificial sun was beginning to set again, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The challenge was complete, but both participants had learned more than they expected. "I owe you an apology, Colonel Morrison," Vexithera said quietly. "I judged your species by appearance and failed to understand your true capabilities. You have shown me that there are different kinds of strength, and yours may be more valuable than mine." Morrison shook his head. "No apology needed, General. You tested me honestly and pushed me to perform at my best. That is what good training partners do for each other." "Training partners?" The general considered this concept. "You do not see this as a victory over an enemy? I see this as a learning experience that will make both our militaries stronger. Your people have incredible natural advantages that my forces could never match in direct combat. But perhaps we can share knowledge that benefits everyone." Vexithera understood now why humans had achieved spaceflight despite their apparent weaknesses. They did not rely on individual superiority. They built systems that multiplied their collective capabilities. They adapted to challenges instead of trying to overpower them. They endured setbacks that would break other species and found ways to turn disadvantages into strengths. The simulation ended with a soft chime, and the desert environment faded away to reveal the plain walls of the arena. Medical teams were waiting to check both warriors, but neither required serious attention. Morrison was tired but uninjured. Vexithera was exhausted, but had learned valuable lessons about his own limitations. In the observation deck, Ambassador Martinez and the other human diplomats watched in amazement as their military representative helped the alien general down from the simulation platform. Instead of gloating about his victory, Morrison was discussing the challenge with Vexithera, like they were old friends comparing notes after a training exercise. The alien representatives throughout the station received detailed reports about what they had witnessed. A human had defeated one of the galaxy's most respected warrior species not through superior technology or enhanced abilities, but through determination, intelligence, and careful planning. More importantly, the human had shown honor and compassion, even toward an opponent who had shown him none. Word of the challenge spread quickly through the galactic community. Humans were no longer seen as weak newcomers who had achieved spaceflight through luck. They were recognized as a species with unique capabilities that made them formidable allies and dangerous enemies. General Vexithera returned to the Quran Empire with a new understanding of warfare and a strong recommendation for military cooperation with the Terran Alliance. Jake Morrison went back to his duties as if nothing unusual had happened, because for a Marine, completing impossible missions was just another day at the office. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about the newest species to join the interstellar community. Humans might not look dangerous, but they were the kind of opponents who became more effective the longer a conflict lasted. They were persistence hunters on a cosmic scale, and they never, ever quit.